Hello. Welcome to another episode of Vintage Lit. Today, we will be finishing the story Levison's Victim by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Had your agent any reason to identify this woman with Mrs. Levison? None, except for the fact that Mrs. Levison was missing, and his natural habit of suspicion. The paragraph was nearly a month old when it reached me. I set off at once for this place named, saw the village authorities, and visited the Englishwoman's grave. They showed me the dress she had worn, a black silk, very simply made. Her face had been too much disfigured by the fall, and the passage of time that had occurred before the finding of the body, for them to give me any minute description of her appearance. They could only tell me that her hair was dark auburn, color of Laura's, thick and long, and that her figure was that of a young woman. After exhausting every possible inquiry, I pushed on to the next village, and there received confirmation of my worst fears. A gentleman and his wife, the man of foreign appearance, but talking English. The woman, young and beautiful, had stopped for a night at the chief inn of the place, and had left the next morning without a guide. The gentleman, who talked perfect German, told the landlady that his traveling carriage and servants were to meet him at the nearest stage on their home journey. He knew every inch of the country, and wished to walk across the mountain in order to show his wife a prospect which had struck him particularly upon his last expedition a few years before. The landlady remembered that, just before setting out, he had asked his wife some questions about her watch, took it from her to regulate it, and then, after some peevish exclamation about her carelessness, put it into his waistcoat pocket. The lady was very pale and quiet, and seemed unhappy. The description which the woman gave me was only too like the woman I was looking for. And you believe there had been foul play? As certainly as I believe in my own existence. This man Levison had grown tired of his wife, whose affections had never been his. Nay more, I have reason to know that his unresting jealousy had intensified into a kind of hatred of her some time before the end. From the village in the Tyrol, which they left together on that bright October morning, I tracked their footsteps stage by stage, back to the point at which I had lost them, on the Italian frontier. In the course of my wanderings, I met with a young Austrian officer, who had seen them at Milan, and had ventured to pay the lady some frivolous, harmless attention. He told me that he had never seen anything so appalling as Levison's jealousy, not an open fury, but a concentrated, silent rage, which gave an almost devilish expression to the man's parchment face. He watched his wife like a lynx, and did not allow her a moment's freedom from his presence. Everyone who met them pitied the beautiful girlish wife, whose misery was so evident. Everyone loathed her tyrant. I found that the story of the servants and the traveling carriage was a lie. The Levisons had been attended by no servants at any one of the hotels where I heard of them, and had traveled always in public or in hired vehicles. The ultimate result of my inquiries left me little doubt that the dead woman was Laura Levison, and from that hour to this I have been employed more or less in the endeavor to find the man who murdered her. And you have not been able to discover his whereabouts? Asked Frank Lorimer. Not yet. I am looking for him. A useless quest, Horace. What would be the result of your finding him? You have no proof to offer of his guilt. You would not take the law into your own hands. By the heaven above me, I would, answered the other fiercely. I would shoot the man down with as little compunction as I would kill a mad dog. I hope you may never meet him, said Frank solemnly. Horace Windward gave a short, impatient sigh, and paced the room for some time in silence. His share in the breakfast had been a mere pretense. He had emptied his coffee cup, but had eaten nothing. I'm going back to London this afternoon, Frank. On the hunt for this man? Yes. My agent sent me a description of a man calling himself Lewis, a bill discounter, who has lately set up an office in the city, and whom I believe to be Michael Levison. The office occupied by Mr. Lewis, the bill discounter, was a dismal place enough, consisting of a second floor and a narrow alley called St. Guinevere's Lane. Horace Winward presented himself at this office about a week after his arrival in London, in the character of a gentleman in difficulties. He found Mr. Lewis exactly the kind of man he expected to see. A man of about 50, with small, crafty black eyes shining out of a sallow visage that was as dull and lifeless as a parchment mask, thin lips with a cruel expression, and a heavy jaw and bony chin that betokened no small amount of power for evil. Mr. Winward presented himself under his own name, on hearing which the bill discounter looked up at him suddenly with an exclamation of surprise. "You know my name," said Horace. "Yes, I have heard your name before. I thought you were a rich man. I have a good estate, but I have been rather imprudent, and am short of ready money. Where and when did you hear my name, Mr. Lewis?" "I don't remember that. The name sounds familiar to me, that's all. But you have heard of me as a rich man, you say?" "I had an impression to that effect, but the circumstances under which I heard the name have quite escaped my memory." Horace pushed the question no further, played his cards very carefully, leading the usurer to believe that he had secured a profitable prey. The preliminaries of a loan were discussed, but nothing fully settled, and before leaving, Horace Winward invited Mr. Lewis to dine with him at his lodgings, in the neighborhood of Piccadilly, on the following evening. After a few minutes' reflection, Lewis accepted the invitation. He made his appearance at the appointed hour, dressed in a suit of shabby black, in which his sallow complexion looked more than usually parchment-like and ghastly. The door was opened by Horace Winward in person, and the moneylender was surprised to find himself in an almost empty house. In the hall and on the staircase were no signs of occupation whatever. But in the dining room, to which Horace immediately ushered his guest, there was a table readily laid for dinner, a couple of chairs, and a dumbwaiter loaded with the appliances of the meal. The room was dimly lit by 4 wax candles in a tarnished candelabra. Mr. Lewis, the moneylender, looked around him with a shudder. There was something sinister in the aspect of the room. "It's rather a dreary-looking place, I'm afraid," said Horace Winward. "I've only just taken the house, you see, and have had in a few sticks of hired furniture to keep me going till I make arrangements with an upholsterer. But you'll excuse all the shortcomings, I'm sure. Bachelor fare, you know. I thought you said you were in lodgings, Mr. Winward." "Did I?" asked the other absently. "A mere slip of the tongue. I took this house on lease a week ago, and am going to furnish it as soon as I am in funds." "And are you positively alone here?" inquired Mr. Lewis suspiciously. "Well, very nearly so. There's a charwoman somewhere in the depths below, as deaf as a post and almost as useless. But you needn't be frightened about your dinner. I had it in from a confectioner in Piccadilly." He lifted the cover of the soup tureen as he spoke. The visitor seated himself at the table with rather a nervous air, and glanced more than once in the direction of the shutters, closely fastened with heavy bars. He began to think that there was something alarmingly eccentric in the conduct and manner of his host, and was inclined to repent having accepted the invitation, profitable as his new client promised to be. The dinner was excellent, the wines of the first quality, and after drinking somewhat freely, Mr. Lewis began to be better reconciled to his position. He was a little disconcerted, however, in perceiving that his host scarcely touched either the viands or the wine, and that those deep-set gray eyes were lifted every now and then to his face with a strangely observant look. When the dinner was over, Mr. Winward heaped the dishes on the dumbwaiter and wheeled it into the next room with his own hands, and came back to his seat at the table, opposite the bill discounter, who sat meditatively sipping his claret. Horace filled his glass, but remained for some time silent, without once lifting it to his lips. His companion watched him nervously, every moment more impressed with the belief that there was something wrong in this new client's mind, and bent on making a speedy escape. He finished his claret, looked at his watch, and rose hastily. "I think I must wish you good night, Mr. Winward. I am a man of early habits, and have some distance to go. My lodging is at Brompton, more than an hour's ride from here." "Stay," said Horace. "We have not yet begun business. It's only 9 o'clock. I want an hour's quiet talk with you, Mr. Levison. The bill discounter's face changed. It was almost impossible for that pallid mask of parchment to grow more pale. But a sudden ghastliness came over the man's evil countenance. "My name is Lewis," he said, with an artificial grin. "Lewis or Levison. Men of your trade have as many names as they please. When you were traveling in Switzerland 2 years ago, your name was Levison. When you married Laura Devontree, your name was Levison. You are under some absurd mistake, sir. The name of Levison is strange to me. Is the name of Daventry strange to you, too? You recognized my name yesterday. When you first heard it, I was a happy man, Michael Levison. The blight upon me is your work. Oh, I know you well enough, and am provided with ample means for your identification. I have followed you step by step upon your travels, tracked you to the inn from which you set out one October morning, nearly a year ago, with a companion who was never seen alive by mortal eyes after that day. You are a good German scholar, Mr. Levison. Read that." Horace Windward took out of his pocketbook the paragraph cut from the German paper and laid it before his visitor. The bill discounter pushed it away after a hasty glance at its contents. "What has this to do with me?" "A great deal, Mr. Levison. The hapless woman described in that paragraph was once your wife, Laura Daventry. The girl I loved, and who returned my love. The girl whom you baselessly stole from me, by trading on her natural affection for a weak, unworthy father, and whose life you made wretched, until it was foully ended by your cruel hand. If I had stood behind you upon that lonely mountain pathway in the Tyrol, and had seen you hurl your victim to destruction, I could not be more convinced than I am that your arm did the deed. But such crimes as these are difficult, in this case perhaps impossible, to prove, and I fear you will escape the gallows. There are other circumstances in your life, however, more easily brought to light, and by the aid of a clever detective, I have made myself master of some curious secrets in your past. I know the name you bore some 15 years ago, before you settled in Trinidad as a merchant. You were at that time called Michael Lucas, and you fled from this country with a large sum of money, embezzled from your employers, Mrs. Hull and Oliphant, sugar brokers in St. Nicholas Lane. You have been wanted a long time, Mr. Levison, but you would most likely have gone scot-free to the inn, had I not set my man to hunt you and your antecedents." Michael Levison rose from his seat hastily, trembling in every limb. Horace rose at the same moment, and the two men stood face to face, one the very image of craven fear, the other cool and self-possessed. "This is a tissue of lies," gasped Levison, wiping his lips nervously with a handkerchief that fluttered in his tremulous fingers. "Have you brought me here to insult me with this madman's talk?" "I have brought you here to your doom. There was a time when I thought that if you and I ever stood face to face, I should shoot you down like a dog. But I have changed my mind. Such carrion as you are not worth the stain of guilt upon an honest man's hand. It is useless to tell you how I loved the girl you murdered. Your savage nature would not comprehend any but the basest and most selfish passion. Don't stir another step. I have a loaded revolver within reach, and shall make an end of you if you attempt to leave this room. The police are on the watch for you outside, and you will leave this place for a jail. Hark! What is that?" It was a footstep on the stairs outside, a woman's footstep, and the rustling of a silk dress. The dining room door was ajar, and the sounds were very audible in the bare, empty house. Michael Levison made for the door, availing himself of this momentary diversion with some vague hope of escape, but within a few paces of the door, he recoiled suddenly, with a hoarse, gasping cry. The door was pushed wide open by a light hand, and a figure stood upon the threshold. A girlish figure, dressed in black silk. A pale, sad face, framed by dark auburn hair. "The dead returned to life!" cried Levison. "Hide her! Hide her! I can't face her! Let me go!" He made for the other door, leading into the inner room, but found it locked, and then sank cowering down into his chair, covering his eyes with skinny hands. The girl came softly into the room and stood by Horace Windward. "You have forgotten me, Mr. Levison," she said, "and you take me for my sister's ghost. I was always like her, and they say I have grown more so within the last 2 years. We had a letter from you a month ago, posted from Trinidad, telling us that my sister Laura was well and happy there with you, yet you mistake me for the shadow of the dead." The frightened wretch did not look up. He had not yet recovered from the shock produced by his sister-in-law's sudden appearance. The handkerchief which he held to his lips was stained with blood. Horace Windward went quietly to the outer door and opened it, returning presently with 2 men, who came softly into the room and approached Levison. He made no attempt to resist them, as they slipped a pair of handcuffs on his bony wrists and led him away. There was a cab standing outside, ready to convey him to prison. Emily Daventry sank into a chair as he was taken from the room. "Oh, Mr. Windward," she said, "I think there can be little doubt of my sister's wretched fate. The experiment which you proposed has succeeded all too well." Horace had been down to Devonshire to question the 2 girls about their sister. He had been struck by Emily's likeness to his lost love, and had brought her up to London with him in order to identify Levison by her means, and to test the effect which her appearance might produce upon the nerves of a suspected assassin. The police were furnished with a complicated mass of evidence against Levison in his character of clerk, merchant, and bill discounter, but the business was of a nature that entailed much delay, and after several adjourned examinations, the prisoner fell desperately ill of a heart disease from which he had suffered for years, but which grew much worse during his imprisonment. Finding his death certain, he sent for Horace Windward, and to him confessed his crime, boasting of his wife's death with a fiendish delight in the deed, which he called an act of vengeance against his rival. "I knew you well enough when you came home, Horace Windward," he said, "and I thought it would be my happy lot to compass your ruin. You trapped me, but to the last you have the worst of it. The girl you loved is dead. She dared to tell me that she loved you, defied my anger, told me that she had sold herself to me to save her father from disgrace, and confessed that she hated, and had always hated me. From that hour she was doomed. Her white face was a constant reproach to me. I was goaded to madness by her tears. She used to say your name in her sleep. I wonder I did not cut her throat as she lay there, with the name upon her lips. But I must have swung for that, so I was patient, and waited till I could have her alone with me upon the mountains. It was only a push, and she was gone. I came home alone, free from the worry and fever of her presence, except in my dreams. She has haunted them with her pale face, and the one long shriek that went up to the sky as she fell. He died within a few days of this interview, and before his final trial could take place. Time, that heals almost all griefs, brought peace by and by to Horace Windward. He furnished the house in Mayfair, and for some time led a misanthropical life there. But on paying a second visit to Devonshire, where the 2 Daventry girls lived their simple, industrious life in their aunt's school, he discovered that Emily's likeness to her sister made her very dear to him, and in the following year, he brought a mistress to Crofton, in the person of that young lady. Together, they paid a mournful visit to that lonely spot in the Tyrol, where Laura Levison had perished, and stayed there while a white marble cross was erected above the grave. Thank you for joining me for this story. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like on this video. If you would like to hear other stories like this one, please feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any suggestions for stories that you would like to hear, please leave a comment down below. Thank you, and good evening.